Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we venture into the forgotten wilderness of the American national parks, where vast national parks stretch beyond sight, where dense forests swallow sound, and where help does not reach. Hidden within these landscapes are 7 of the most terrifying horror stories ever experienced by those who dared to explore too far. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the American national parks, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Daniel Reeves, and this happened 3 years ago when I decided to hike alone through one of the most remote national parks in the country. I wasn't reckless. I had experience, gear, maps. Everything you'd expect from someone who respected nature. My goal was simple: document a lesser-known trail rumored to offer one of the most beautiful hidden valleys in the park. Something off-grid, something untouched. The ranger at the station hesitated when I mentioned it. He flipped through a large map, frowning. That trail shouldn't be accessible anymore, he muttered. It was closed years ago. But I had seen recent online posts, photos, even GPS coordinates. People had been there. He eventually marked a vague area and warned me, if something feels off, don't keep going. At the time, I thought he meant wildlife, unstable terrain, maybe weather. Looking back, I think he meant something else entirely. Because the moment I stepped onto that trail, something felt wrong. Not dangerous, just wrong. At first, it seemed normal. The trail was narrow but clear enough to follow, winding between towering pine trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. My boots crunched against dry leaves, and the air carried that familiar scent of earth and wood. But after about 20 minutes, I noticed something strange. There were no sounds, no birds, no insects, nothing. I stopped walking, thinking maybe I just hadn't paid attention before. But the silence was absolute. The kind that presses against your ears until you feel it in your chest. I checked my map again. According to it, I should have reached a small creek by now. There was no creek, just more forest. I turned around to double-check the path behind me, and that's when my stomach dropped. The trail looked different. Not completely gone, but not the same either. And for the first time since I started hiking, I felt like I wasn't alone out there. I stood there for a long moment, staring back at the trail I had just walked. At first glance, it looked normal, but the longer I focused on it, the more details felt off. The trees seemed closer together, their trunks slightly twisted in ways I didn't remember passing. The ground behind me looked darker, almost damp, even though the path ahead was dry. I told myself it was just my imagination. Still, I pulled out my phone to check the GPS. No signal. That wasn't unusual in remote areas. But what was strange was the compass app. The needle spun slowly, never settling in one direction. I turned in a full circle, hoping it would correct itself. It didn't. That's when I heard it. A soft crunch. Somewhere behind me. I froze. Another step followed. Not mine. Slow, careful, deliberate. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the empty trail. And the feeling that something had stopped moving the exact second I looked at it. I tried to shake it off and kept walking, convincing myself it was just nerves. But the feeling didn't go away. It followed me. Every step I took felt observed, like something just out of sight was keeping pace with me. matching my movements perfectly. I tested it. I stopped suddenly. The forest went completely still. Then, a second later, I heard it. One more step. Behind me. Not loud, but unmistakable. I turned again, faster this time, but once again, nothing was there. No animals, no movement, no sound, just trees. Too many trees. That's when I noticed something new. Markings. Scratches carved into the bark of the nearest trunk. Deep, jagged lines. Too deliberate to be natural, but too uneven to be made with any normal tool. They weren't random. They formed shapes, symbols. And as I looked closer, I realized something that made my chest tighten. They weren't facing the trail. They were facing me. I stepped back from the tree, my eyes locked on those carved symbols. Up close, they were worse than I thought. The grooves were deep, splintering the bark as if whoever made them had pressed with extreme force. Some lines overlapped, jagged and uneven, forming shapes that almost looked like letters, but not from any language I recognized. And they were fresh. The exposed wood beneath was still pale, untouched by weather or decay. Someone had made these recently. My first thought was that maybe another hiker had come through, marking their path. But that didn't make sense. The symbols weren't directional. They didn't guide anywhere. They just faced outward, toward the trail, toward me. A cold realization crept in. These weren't meant to guide someone through the forest. They were meant to be seen from the trail, as a warning or something else. Then I noticed more of them, dozens, carved into nearly every tree around me. And suddenly, the forest didn't feel empty anymore. My instincts screamed at me to turn back. Whatever this place was, it wasn't part of any normal trail system. The ranger's hesitation, the broken silence, the shifting path, it all started to make sense in the worst possible way. I grabbed my map again, trying to retrace my steps. But something wasn't right. The landmarks didn't match. The trail behind me looked narrower now, almost swallowed by the surrounding trees. The way forward, however, seemed clearer, more defined. It was as if the forest was encouraging me to keep going. That thought alone made my chest tighten. I took a few steps backward, testing my path out. The ground felt uneven, unfamiliar, like I was stepping somewhere I hadn't walked before. That's when I heard it again. Closer this time. A breath, not loud, but right behind me. Warm, slow, intentional. I spun around instantly. But once again, there was nothing there. At that point, I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just wanted out. I turned fully and started walking back the way I came, forcing myself to stay calm, to think clearly. Panic would only make things worse. I kept my eyes forward, ignoring the carved symbols, ignoring the feeling crawling up the back of my neck. But the further I walked, the more wrong everything became. The trees didn't line up the way I remembered. The ground sloped in directions it shouldn't. And worst of all, the trail didn't lead anywhere. It just kept going. Straight, endless. I stopped again, my breathing uneven now, and turned in a slow circle. Every direction looked the same. Identical trees, identical shadows, identical silence. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. I wasn't retracing my steps. I hadn't been for a while. And whatever path I was on now, it wasn't meant to lead me back. The panic hit me all at once. I pulled out my phone again, desperately checking for any signal, but the screen remained empty. Even the compass was still spinning, useless. I tried to think logically. Pick a direction. Stick to it. Eventually, I'd find something. Anything. So I chose a path and started walking. Faster this time, then jogging, then almost running. Branches scraped against my arms as I pushed forward, ignoring the sting, ignoring the growing sense that I was being funneled somewhere. Because that's what it felt like. Not lost, directed, like the forest itself was guiding me. After what felt like an hour, I saw something ahead. A clearing. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled toward it. But the moment I stepped into the open space, that relief vanished. Because in the center of the clearing, there was a structure. Old, decaying, a wooden cabin, and judging by the deep, claw-like marks covering its walls, it wasn't abandoned. I slowed down as I approached the cabin, every instinct telling me to stay away. Up close, it looked worse. The wood was splintered and warped, like it had been exposed to years of harsh weather. But something didn't add up. The damage wasn't natural. Long, deep gouges ran across the walls and door, layered over each other as if something had clawed at it again and again. The windows were shattered, not broken outward, but inward, like something had tried to get inside, or something had tried to get out. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The silence around me felt heavier now, suffocating. Then, I heard it again. That same slow, deliberate step. This time, from behind me. But I didn't turn around, because I already knew. If I did, I wouldn't be alone anymore. I forced myself to move. Not toward the cabin, but around it. Slowly, carefully, trying not to make a sound. Every step felt wrong, like I was being watched from multiple directions now. The air had changed, thicker, colder, almost suffocating. Then I saw the door, slightly open, just enough to reveal darkness inside. And on the wood, more of those symbols, the same ones carved into the trees. But these were different, messier, desperate. Like whoever carved them wasn't trying to warn others. They were trying to keep something out. My chest tightened as a horrifying realization settled in. The trail, the symbols, the silence. It wasn't random. It was controlled, contained, and I had walked straight into it. That's when the door creaked open a little more, on its own. And from the darkness inside, something exhaled, right as something behind me took its first step into the clearing. My name is Eric Lawson, and this happened during my first week as a volunteer at one of the largest national parks in the country. I had always loved the outdoors, which is why I signed up for the program. It was supposed to be simple: assist rangers, monitor trails, and help with communication logs. Nothing dangerous, nothing unpredictable. At least, that's what I thought. On my third day, I was assigned to the communications office, a small, outdated room filled with old radio equipment that looked like it hadn't been replaced in decades. That's where I met Ranger Holt. He was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of person who seemed like he had a lot to say but chose not to. When I introduced myself, he barely nodded before pointing to a chair. "Just log anything unusual," he said. I asked him what counted as unusual. He paused for a second, then replied, "You'll know when you hear it." At the time, I thought he was joking. But later that night, I heard something that made me question everything. The shift started quietly, too quietly. The kind of silence that settles into your bones and makes every small sound feel amplified. The radio sat on the desk in front of me, occasionally crackling with static, but nothing significant came through. Ranger Holt sat across the room, staring at a different receiver, his expression unreadable. Hours passed like that. Then, just after midnight, the radio came alive. A sharp burst of static filled the room, loud enough to make me flinch. I quickly grabbed the logbook, ready to note it down, but then a voice came through, distorted, weak. "Hello? If anyone's there, please respond." I looked up at Holt, expecting him to react. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even look surprised. The voice continued, barely audible beneath the static. "I'm not on the trail anymore." A chill ran down my spine, because something about that voice didn't sound like a normal distress call. It sounded wrong. I leaned closer to the radio, my hand hovering over the transmit button. For a second, I hesitated. Something about the voice felt off. Not just the distortion, but the tone. It didn't carry the urgency you'd expect from someone lost in the wilderness. It sounded distant, detached, like the person speaking wasn't entirely aware of what was happening to them. "I can't see the markers anymore," the voice continued, breaking through waves of static. "They were here, and then they just stopped." I pressed the button. "Hello? This is Park Communications. Can you identify your location?" For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, "You shouldn't answer." I froze. My eyes instinctively shifted toward Ranger Holt. He was staring directly at me now, not at the radio, at me. And slowly, he shook his head. My fingers slipped off the transmit button. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier, like something had changed the moment I responded. "Why did you do that?" Holt asked quietly. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It sounded concerned. "I thought someone needed help," I said, my voice uncertain now. Holt stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We don't respond to those," he said. "Those?" I repeated. But before he could answer, the radio crackled again. This time the voice sounded closer, clearer. "You heard me." A pause. Then, softer. That means it knows where you are now." Every muscle in my body went rigid. The static grew louder, almost drowning out everything else. But beneath it, I swore I could hear something else. Not a voice. Breathing. Slow. Uneven. Like something was pressing right up against the other side of the transmission. Listening, I couldn't take my eyes off the radio. The sound coming through it wasn't normal static anymore. It had a pattern to it, rising and falling, almost like something was trying to form words, but couldn't quite manage it. And beneath that breathing was still there. Closer now. Too close. I looked at Holt, my voice barely steady. "What is this?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over and turned down the volume slightly, though it didn't help much. The sound still cut through the room, vibrating in the air. "That frequency," he finally said, "hasn't been used in years." I frowned. "Then how is someone—" "No one is supposed to be on it," he interrupted. That word again. Supposed. Before I could ask anything else, the voice returned. Stronger this time. "I found the tower." My stomach dropped, because according to the maps I had studied, there were no active towers anywhere near this park. "The tower?" I repeated, my voice tight. Holt's expression darkened in a way I hadn't seen before. He didn't look confused. He looked like he already knew. "That's not possible," he said under his breath. The radio crackled violently again, making both of us flinch. "It's not on the map," the voice continued. "But it's here. I can see it." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Something about the way he said it. It wasn't relief. It wasn't hope. It sounded like realization, like he had just found something he wasn't meant to. I leaned closer despite myself. "Can you describe your surroundings? What trail were you on?" For a moment there was silence. Then the voice whispered, "There is no trail anymore." The lights in the room flickered, just once, but long enough for the entire space to feel wrong. And when the lights stabilized, Holt was no longer looking at the radio. He was staring at the door. I followed his gaze instinctively. The door to the communications room was closed, but something about it felt wrong. The handle trembled slightly, like someone had just touched it, or was about to. "Did you lock that?" Holt asked quietly. I shook my head. I didn't even remember seeing a lock on it. The radio crackled again behind us, but neither of us turned back this time. "It followed me here," the voice whispered. A cold wave of dread hit me. Followed. That word echoed in my mind as I stared at the door. The handle moved, just a fraction, but enough for both of us to notice. Holt stepped in front of me instantly, his posture tense, his eyes fixed on the door like he was expecting something to force its way through. "Don't open it," he said under his breath. "I wasn't going to," I replied, though my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. Then, a slow, deliberate knock echoed from the other side. The knock came again. Slower this time, heavier. Each impact felt like it echoed through my chest instead of the door. I took a step back without realizing it, my breath shallow, my eyes locked on the handle. "Holt," I whispered. But he didn't respond. He was listening, not to the knocking, to something else. The radio. "Don't let it in," the voice pleaded weakly. "It doesn't know how to open it yet." My stomach twisted. Yet. Another knock. Louder, the door frame creaked slightly under the pressure. I glanced at Holt again, and what I saw made my blood run cold. He wasn't just afraid. He looked resigned, like he had seen this before, like he knew how this would end. Then, without warning, the radio went completely silent. No static, no voice, nothing. And in that sudden, suffocating silence, the door handle slowly began to turn. The handle turned all the way. A soft click followed. The door creaked open just an inch. Neither of us moved. I couldn't even breathe. The gap was small, too small to see anything clearly, but the darkness beyond it felt deeper than it should have been. Not like a hallway, not like the outside, just darkness. Then, slowly, the door pushed open further. No footsteps, no visible movement, just the wood dragging softly against the floor as the gap widened. My eyes strained to adjust, trying to make out anything in that black space. But there was nothing. Until something shifted. Not clearly, not fully, just a subtle distortion, like the air itself bending inward. And then I heard it, breathing. The same breathing from the radio, only now. It wasn't coming through the speakers. It was right there, on the other side of the door. I stumbled backward, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. "Holt," I whispered, my voice breaking. But he didn't respond. I looked at him, and my heart dropped. He wasn't looking at the door anymore. He was looking at the radio. The speaker crackled once, just once. Then, "You opened it." The voice was clearer now. Too clear. and it wasn't coming from the forest anymore. It was coming from inside the room. My chest tightened as I slowly turned back toward the door. The darkness had shifted, expanded, and for a brief second, I saw something. A shape. Tall. Unnatural. Its outline barely visible, but its presence undeniable. Then the lights flickered violently, and everything went black. When they came back on, the door was closed, the radio was silent, and Holt was gone. My name is Vanessa Clark, and this happened during a summer camping trip with two friends at one of the largest national park lakes in the country. We had planned everything meticulously: tents, supplies, a small boat, and a camera to document our adventure. The lake was remote, known for its beauty and serenity. But what drew us most was its legend that no one had ever slept soundly near its waters. Some called it superstition, others shrugged it off as exaggeration. We laughed at those warnings as we set up camp near the shore, the sun dipping low behind the mountains. Night fell, and the lake became a mirror, perfectly still under a silver moon. It should have been calming. Instead, I felt a cold prickling along my spine, as if unseen eyes were scanning our tents from across the water. The sound of lapping waves carried an almost rhythmic pattern, not natural, too deliberate, too quiet for something so close to shore. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. By midnight, the stillness of the lake had shifted. It started small, a ripple on the water's surface, faint at first. We thought it was wind, but the ripple grew, forming patterns that didn't match the natural flow. My friend Mark, sitting by the fire, pointed toward the water. "Did you see that?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. We all froze. Something was moving just beneath the surface, too large for a fish, too deliberate for waves. It circled our small boat several times without fully emerging. My heart raced. "Maybe it's a beaver or a log," I suggested weakly, trying to calm myself. But then it happened. The water near the shore splashed violently, far too strong to be natural. The sound of something wet and heavy hitting the sand echoed across the empty forest, followed by a faint, dragging noise that seemed to pull toward us from the dark waters. I realized then that this was no ordinary lake. It was alive, and it was watching. I tried to stay calm, but every instinct screamed that we were not alone. My friends were tense too, whispering to each other, eyes darting toward the dark waters. The lake, once serene, now seemed to pulse, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Mark suggested we call it a night and retreat to our tents. Reluctantly, we agreed. But as we walked back to shore, the water's surface erupted once again. Something massive broke through, just for a fraction of a second, revealing a dark, glistening shape that looked almost humanoid, but not quite. Its limbs were too long, too flexible, and its head twisted unnaturally. We froze. I felt the hair on my arms rise. The creature didn't attack. It simply observed, circling, keeping us in sight. Every instinct told me to run, but our feet felt glued to the sand. My mind screamed, yet my voice refused to work. We realized, in that instant, this lake was no ordinary body of water. It was a predator. We finally stumbled into our tents, hearts pounding. I tried to rationalize what we had seen, but the image of the creature's twisted limbs haunted me. My friends whispered reassurances to each other, but the fear in their eyes mirrored my own. Then the sound started. Soft at first, a low hum that seemed to rise from beneath the lake. Not wind, not an animal, a vibrating tone that made the air around us shiver. It was rhythmic, like some ancient chant, and it carried a malevolent weight. I peeked out from the tent flap. The water glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight unnaturally. Ripples spread across the surface, forming shapes that looked like faces. Faces staring at us. A cold hand seemed to grip my chest. My rational mind screamed this was impossible. Yet there was no denying it. Something in that lake didn't want us here, didn't want us to leave, and it would make sure we knew it. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the tents, every rustle of leaves made me flinch. I could feel the lake's presence pressing against us, a suffocating, unseen force. Mark tried to joke, but his voice cracked with tension. Sarah refused to look outside, whispering prayers under her breath. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to warp near the water. Then I heard it, a dragging sound coming from the shore toward our tents. Slow, wet, deliberate. I froze, straining my ears, listening. My pulse thundered in my temples. The water lapped against the sand in an unnatural rhythm. Then a shadow appeared on the surface. It was tall, almost humanoid, moving fluidly as if gliding just beneath the water. Its eyes, or what resembled eyes, glimmered faintly under the moonlight. It stopped when it reached the edge of the shore, hovering just beyond the sand. And then it spoke, or something within my mind did, without opening a mouth. You shouldn't be here. I could barely breathe, but I had to move. Whispering, I told Mark and Sarah to gather supplies and get to the car as fast as possible. They nodded silently, eyes wide with panic. We stepped out of the tents, careful not to make sudden movements. The lake seemed alive under the moonlight. Ripples followed our every step, as if it were tracking us. The shadow moved closer, fluidly and silently, and the cold air carried a faint, wet smell that made my stomach twist. I glanced back at the water, just in time to see something break the surface. Its form emerged partially, elongated limbs, slick skin reflecting moonlight, a face too distorted to recognize as human. It didn't rush us. It didn't roar. It just stared, waiting, calculating. The dragging sound returned, this time behind us, near the forest line. Whatever it wasn't confined to the lake. And in that moment, I understood. There was no escaping this. Not tonight. We ran toward the car, the sand soft beneath our feet, every step accompanied by a wet, dragging sound from the shore. I dared a glance back. The creature had fully emerged, tall and menacing, its distorted limbs reflecting the pale moonlight like dark steel. It didn't chase us. Not yet. But it moved with a purpose, maintaining perfect alignment with our path. I felt its gaze on my back, a weight pressing into my shoulders, even as I sprinted. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the terror behind me gave me unnatural speed. When we reached the tree line, I thought we could hide, but the forest wasn't forgiving. Branches snapped unnaturally under its weight, though nothing visibly followed. And from the lake came a low hum again, vibrating through the ground into our bones. I stumbled into the shadows, trying to find cover. But the feeling was everywhere. The lake, the shore, the trees, all connected. And it was aware. We ducked behind a cluster of trees, panting and shaking, hearts hammering. I could hear the wet dragging sound approaching, then halting just beyond our cover. Every instinct screamed to flee, but we didn't dare move. The lake reflected a faint glow now, as if the water itself was alive, pulsing slowly with a heartbeat we could feel. From the shadows between the trees, I glimpsed movement, slightly distorted, unnervingly fluid. like the forest itself had been bent by some unseen force. Then the hum became a whispering chant, words forming in the cold night air. "Why are you here? You cannot leave." Sarah whimpered. Mark grabbed her arm, urging silence. But even in the stillness, the water rippled unnaturally, and the glowing eyes of the creature appeared again, observing. I realized then that this lake wasn't just a place. It was a guardian, or a prison. And somehow, we had walked right into its domain. We stayed crouched behind the trees, frozen in terror. Every sound felt amplified, the rustle of leaves, the lapping of water, the whisper of wind. Or was it the whisper of the lake itself? My mind raced, trying to figure out a way out, any way to escape without drawing attention. Then, without warning, the creature stepped onto the sand. Its elongated limbs made no sound, yet the ground seemed to quiver with its presence. It moved toward the tents, deliberately, slowly, as if assessing what had entered its territory. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My body was paralyzed with fear. The whispering chant rose again. "You cannot leave. You belong to the water." And then the tent flaps shook violently, as if something or someone was trying to reach inside. My friend's eyes met mine, wide with panic. We understood, without words, that the lake had decided we weren't leaving until it allowed us. We made a split-second decision. Holding hands, we bolted toward the car, ignoring every instinct to stay quiet. The dragging sound returned, faster this time, following every step. Branches snapped, sand shifted, and the creature's glowing eyes remained locked on us. We reached the car, trembling, fumbling with keys. As the engine roared to life, the lake behind us erupted, ripples forming humanoid shapes, dozens of them, faces staring, limbs stretching unnaturally. It was as if the water itself had risen to stop us. I slammed the door, Mark and Sarah huddled beside me, and we drove off without looking back. The forest and the lake fell behind us, but the memory stayed. I never saw the creature clearly, yet I could feel its gaze, following, waiting, patient. Even now, years later, I refuse to camp near any lake. Something about that water. It refuses to sleep. My name is Daniel Harris, and this happened during a hiking trip with my brother Alex at one of the most remote national park waterfalls. We had planned to camp in a cabin perched high above the falls, a spot few tourists ever reached. It was supposed to be a simple adventure. Hike during the day, relax by the cabin at night, and enjoy the roaring water below. The hike was grueling, the trail steep and slippery, but we were exhilarated. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of moss and wet stone. As we neared the cabin, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, though we had the coordinates and knew it should be locked. My brother shrugged it off. "Maybe the rangers left it open," he said. But when we stepped inside, the cabin felt wrong. Dust lay undisturbed on the floor, yet the furniture seemed rearranged as if someone or something had been here recently, waiting. We tried to shake off the unease and set up our sleeping bags. The roar of the falls was deafening, but strangely, it seemed to mask something else. A faint, irregular sound, like footsteps on the wooden floor above us, even though the cabin had only one level. Alex laughed nervously, trying to convince himself, and me, that it was probably just the wind or the old building settling. I wasn't so sure. The hairs on my arms were standing on end, and every instinct screamed that we were being watched. As night fell, the darkness outside seemed to creep in through the windows, swallowing the cabin in shadow. That's when I noticed the carvings on the walls, small and almost hidden. Symbols etched into the wooden beams, sharp and deliberate. They weren't decorative. They were warnings or instructions left by someone long gone. And for the first time, I realized the cabin wasn't just abandoned. It was alive with history. And whatever remained behind it did not welcome visitors. Around midnight, I woke to a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. At first, I thought it was Alex shifting in his sleeping bag. But the sound persisted, rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the far corner of the cabin. I froze, listening. Every instinct told me to stay quiet, but my curiosity won. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it across the room. The beam trembled in my hand. Shadows danced along the walls, elongating the carvings into grotesque shapes. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving just beyond the corner, impossible to identify, shifting too quickly to be human. "Alex," I whispered, shaking him awake. He groaned, half asleep, but immediately stiffened as he noticed my pale face and the beam of light swinging toward the movement. The shadow stopped moving, but the scratching continued. Then, a whisper, soft, almost drowned out by the falls below, spoke from nowhere. "You shouldn't be here." Alex grabbed a nearby chair, holding it in front of him like a weapon. My hands trembled as I tried to keep the flashlight steady. The whisper came again, closer this time, though no one was in sight. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating the air around us. I backed toward the door, heart hammering, but the cabin felt impossibly larger than before, the corners stretching as if to trap us. The carvings on the beams now appeared to shift, their sharp edges forming strange patterns, like some ancient language pleading or threatening. Then, the ceiling above creaked violently. Something, or someone, was moving up there. The sound of wood bending under weight filled the cabin. We exchanged a glance, both terrified, both knowing the attic was supposed to be empty. Without a word, we bolted toward the stairs leading upward, compelled by a mixture of fear and dread. Whatever was above, it wanted us to see it. We climbed the narrow staircase slowly, each step groaning under our weight. The attic above was dark, filled with shadows that seemed to move independently. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom, and I could feel the air growing colder with every step. Alex whispered, "I don't think we should be here." I wanted to agree, but something compelled me forward. The scratching had stopped, replaced now by a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the wooden walls. I realized then it wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from inside the cabin itself, surrounding us, pressing in. As we reached the top, I saw them. Small, carved figurines scattered across the floor, all facing the staircase as if watching our every move. Their eyes, hollow and dark, reflected the flashlight in a way that made them seem alive. The hum became a whispering chant, growing louder. "Leave, or stay forever." My stomach churned. We were in the presence of something ancient, patient, and very angry. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut behind us with a deafening crack. I jumped back, heart racing, while Alex tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. The chanting grew louder, closer, echoing off the wooden walls as if the cabin itself were alive and breathing. The figurines shifted subtly, though I knew we hadn't touched them. Their heads now faced us directly, blank expressions frozen in eternal accusation. I could feel a pressure building in the room, like the air was heavy enough to crush my chest. A cold gust of wind blew through the attic, extinguishing my flashlight. Darkness swallowed everything. In the black, I felt something brush against my arm. Not a person, not human. Wet, cold, and heavy, like the weight of water itself. Alex screamed, trying to strike it with the chair. But his arms passed through empty air, and the presence laughed. Or at least, that's what I thought I heard, deep and hollow. I scrambled backward, my hands searching blindly for anything solid. The attic floor seemed to pulse beneath my feet, like it was breathing. Alex's chair clattered to the floor, echoing like a gunshot, and the chanting stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, heavy, suffocating, filled with anticipation. Then I saw it, a shadow detaching from the corner of the attic. It wasn't fully formed, more a distortion of darkness, shifting and flickering like smoke caught in moonlight. It moved toward us without making a sound, and I could feel a cold pressure pushing against my mind, whispering thoughts that weren't mine. You belong here now, forever. Alex grabbed my arm, panic etched into his face. We tried to back away, but the shadow followed, folding into the corners, keeping perfect pace. It wasn't hunting yet. It was playing, and we were its prey. I realized then that leaving the cabin alive would require more than just running. We pressed ourselves against the wall, breathing hard, hearts hammering in unison. The shadow halted a few feet away, lingering, almost contemplative. Every instinct told us to run, but the attic felt impossibly deep, like the walls had expanded to trap us. Suddenly, the whispering returned, this time louder, forming words we could understand clearly. Leave, or stay. You cannot escape. The figurines seemed to twitch subtly, their hollow eyes gleaming in the faint moonlight. I realized that even touching them might provoke the entity further. Desperate, I glanced at the small window on the opposite wall. It was narrow, but it might be our only escape. Alex noticed my gaze and nodded. Silently, we inched toward it, every movement measured, hoping to avoid drawing attention. As we reached the window, the shadow's form flickered violently, as if aware of our plan. My stomach dropped. The cabin wasn't done with us yet. We climbed through the narrow window, scraping our arms on the wooden frame. The shadow followed us, not with speed, but with intent, moving fluidly across the attic floor as if tracking our every heartbeat. Below, the waterfall roared louder, masking some of the terrifying sounds, yet not enough to silence the entity's presence. I swung my legs down, landing on the rocky slope outside. Alex followed, clutching my arm tightly. The figurines seemed to vibrate faintly, as if sensing our escape. The shadow flared at the window, stretching impossibly, its distorted form twisting in anger. The cold pressure against our minds intensified, whispering, "You cannot leave. Not yet." We scrambled down the steep incline, rocks slipping beneath our boots. Each step felt heavier, like the cabin itself was resisting our escape. I could see the cabin looming above, dark and alive, its windows like watching eyes. Whatever haunted that place wasn't just in the attic. It was in every beam, every stone, every shadow. We finally reached the forest floor, hearts pounding, lungs burning. The shadow didn't follow us outside, but the oppressive presence remained, as if the cabin itself had extended its reach. Every step toward the trail felt like moving through invisible resistance. Alex looked back once, and I'll never forget the sight. The cabin stood silent now, windows dark, but a faint glow lingered in the attic, like eyes watching us vanish. The whispering was gone, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on our shoulders. We didn't stop until the trail opened to the parking lot, the distant sound of cars and lights grounding us in reality. But I knew, deep down, that we hadn't escaped completely. The cabin above the falls remained alive, patient, and waiting. Years later, I still dream of it. And every time I hear rushing water, I feel the shadow of the cabin, reminding me that some places in the national parks are better left untouched. My name is Ethan Monroe, and this happened during a solo backpacking trip through a remote trail in one of the densest national park forests. I had planned the hike for months, eager to escape civilization and spend a few nights in the wilderness. The trail was barely marked, overgrown in places, and carried an eerie quiet that I initially mistook for peaceful solitude. By the second night, I set up camp near a bend in the trail, where the trees opened just enough to reveal a small clearing. As I cooked dinner over a portable stove, I noticed something odd. The path I had used to reach the clearing seemed different. The footprints I had left earlier were gone, and the trail twisted in directions I didn't recognize. At first, I laughed it off. Maybe it was the wind or rain erasing my tracks. But then I saw something moving between the trees, something dark, watching. And that's when the real fear began. As night fell, the forest seemed to close in around me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded amplified in the quiet air. I tried to tell myself it was just wildlife, but the shadows moved with intent, too deliberate, too synchronized to be random. I decided to document my experience, pulling out my camera to take photos of the clearing. That's when I noticed the first unsettling detail. In every image, there was a dark figure, just beyond the edge of the frame, standing perfectly still, watching. When I looked with my own eyes, nothing was there. The wind shifted, carrying a faint whisper, almost indistinguishable, threading through the trees. "You shouldn't be here." My pulse quickened. I realized the trail itself was no longer familiar. Every attempt to retrace my steps led me deeper into the forest, further from the path I had followed. It was as if the woods themselves had changed while I wasn't looking. I tried to stay calm, convincing myself that I was tired and imagining things. I packed my camera and flashlight and started walking, hoping to find the trail I had taken earlier. But the forest seemed to shift with every step. Trees appeared in places they hadn't been before, and familiar landmarks were gone. Then I heard it, a soft crunch behind me, like footsteps matching my pace. I spun around, flashlight sweeping through the dense forest, but saw nothing. The air grew heavy, cold, and almost wet, though the night was dry. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to follow the trail. But it was gone, replaced by twisted roots and undergrowth. The whisper returned, louder this time, weaving through the trees. "Turn back, or stay forever." My heart raced, and I realized that the forest was no longer just a forest. It was something alive, aware, and patient. Panic set in. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. The trail markers I had passed earlier were gone, replaced by strange symbols scratched into the bark, jagged and unnatural. My stomach churned at the sight. I knew instinctively they weren't human. I stumbled forward, branches scraping my arms, roots tangling my feet. The footsteps behind me continued, rhythmic and deliberate. Every time I dared to look, nothing was there. Yet the sound persisted. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows growing longer and denser with each step. Then I saw movement. Quick, dark shapes darting between the trees, too fast to be animals. I froze, heart hammering. The forest whispered again, "You cannot leave. Not yet." I realized then that the trail had vanished entirely. It wasn't lost, and it had been taken. And something in the woods had been waiting for me all along. I pushed forward, terrified, but knowing that standing still would mean certain doom. The flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, and the forest seemed to move around me, branches stretching, twisting unnaturally. The footsteps behind me grew louder, yet still unseen, like a predator stalking just out of sight. The symbols on the trees seemed to pulse faintly, glowing under the beam of my flashlight. I realized they weren't random. They were forming a pattern, leading me somewhere. My instincts screamed to stop, but curiosity and fear forced me to follow. Then I heard it. A voice, low and guttural, carried on the wind. Not human, but familiar in a twisted, mocking way. "You cannot leave. Not until you belong." My stomach churned. I glanced back, expecting to see something monstrous. But the shadows had grown thick, almost solid, and the trail had disappeared completely. The forest had claimed me. Every instinct told me that whatever was here was waiting. I ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, my flashlight swinging wildly. Every step felt like the forest was resisting me, branches catching at my clothes, roots tripping me. The footsteps behind me kept pace, relentless, echoing in perfect sync with my own. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the trail ahead, blocking my path. I skidded to a halt, heart hammering. The shape was humanoid, but distorted, taller than any human, with limbs bent at impossible angles. Its face was obscured in shadow, but I felt its gaze pierce me. A whisper cut through the night. "You cannot leave. Not alive." The air grew thick, suffocating, and the sound of rushing water from a distant stream seemed to amplify, almost mocking me. I knew then that the forest wasn't just alive. It was hunting, and the vanishing trail was its trap. Escape would require more than speed. It would require cunning, courage, and a luck I didn't know I had. I slowed my pace, trying to catch my breath and think. The forest seemed endless, and the shadows were everywhere, stretching, writhing, almost sentient. Every step forward felt like moving through molasses. I could feel the presence behind me, patient and deliberate, tracking my heartbeat. Then I noticed something strange. The ground ahead seemed to shift, forming a faint path that hadn't been there before. I hesitated, unsure if it was salvation or another trap. The symbols on the trees pulsed in response to my gaze, guiding me or perhaps taunting me. A movement caught my eye, something slipping silently between the trees, faster than I could follow, yet always just ahead. My chest tightened. I whispered Alex's name, my brother's voice in my mind, and realized how alone I truly was. The forest's whisper returned, this time echoing inside my skull. "You will join the trail? Soon." Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the new path beckoned. I had no choice. I pressed on, following the faint path, every nerve on edge. The trail seemed to breathe beneath my feet, twisting and stretching unnaturally, leading me deeper into the forest. The air was thick and cold, carrying faint whispers that seemed to come from every direction. Then I stumbled upon a clearing, moonlight cutting through the dense canopy, revealing dozens of footprints. They weren't human. Long, elongated impressions, claw-like toes pressed into the mud. The realization hit me like ice. Whatever haunted this trail wasn't of this world. The footsteps behind me slowed. I froze. A shadow flickered at the edge of the clearing, and the air seemed to pulse with a malevolent presence. The forest was watching, waiting, and I understood that I had entered a place where humans were no longer welcome. Every instinct screamed to run, but I knew that running alone might not save me. The vanishing trail had claimed many before me, and it wasn't finished yet. I ran again, this time without thinking, letting instinct guide me. The trail beneath my feet shifted with every step, almost alive, roots and rocks twisting as if trying to trap me. The shadows followed relentlessly, merging with the trees and fog until I could barely distinguish path from predator. Then, in a faint moonlit opening ahead, I saw a flicker of movement, a figure crouched low, watching. It wasn't human, but it had the posture of someone waiting, calculating. My heart raced as I realized it had been leading me here all along. The whispering returned, louder and clearer. The trail belongs to us, and now you do too. I skidded to a halt, trying to gather my bearings. Every direction looked the same, and the forest stretched endlessly around me. I understood then that I wasn't lost by accident. The vanishing trail didn't just erase paths, it consumed them. With no other choice, I sprinted blindly toward the faint glimmer of moonlight, breaking through the canopy. The forest seemed to resist me with every step, branches snagging my clothes, roots tripping my feet, and the shadows closing in behind me. Finally, the trail opened to a wider path, one that looked vaguely familiar. My pulse pounded as I ran, desperate for the parking lot where my car waited. Behind me, the whispering faded, replaced by the low hum of the forest, patient and watchful. I emerged onto the main trail at dawn, exhausted and trembling. The vanishing trail had released me, but I knew it hadn't truly let me go. Something in the forest had marked me, and I could still feel its gaze in every shadow and rustle. Years later, I avoid that park entirely. But sometimes, when hiking elsewhere, I see a faint, twisting path in the undergrowth and wonder, will the vanishing trail find me again? My name is Laura Bennett, and this happened during a weekend trip with my friends Mia and Josh to a remote section of a national park famous for its towering pine forests. We were eager for a quiet getaway, thinking the forest would be peaceful, perfect for hiking and stargazing. As we arrived, the air felt unusually cold and heavy, despite the clear sky. The pines stretched endlessly, their tops disappearing into shadows, even in daylight. The trail we chose was narrow and barely maintained, overgrown in spots, with the occasional broken sign hinting at forgotten paths. By nightfall, we set up camp near a small clearing surrounded by the pines. That's when we first heard it. Faint whispers, almost imperceptible, drifting through the trees. At first, we laughed nervously, blaming the wind. But the whispers were too deliberate, too rhythmic. They seemed to form words we couldn't fully understand, a language that was almost human, yet not. Something about the forest felt alive, aware, and silently observing us. As darkness deepened, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. I could hear soft syllables, as if the forest itself were trying to communicate. Mia tried to joke, but even her laughter sounded hollow in the oppressive stillness. Josh kept glancing into the shadows, unease written all over his face. We tried to focus on our campfire, hoping the light would keep whatever it was at bay. But the whispers seemed to circle us, rising from one side of the clearing to the other, impossible to locate. I felt a cold draft pass through, brushing against my neck, though the night air was still. Then I saw movement among the trees. Figures, dark and thin, slipping silently between the pines. They didn't approach directly, but their presence was undeniable, stalking our edges. My pulse raced. For the first time, I realized we weren't alone in the forest. Something was watching, learning, and waiting. We tried to ignore the figures and focus on our campfire, but the whispers grew louder, almost demanding our attention. Every syllable seemed filled with intent, wrapping around us, making our heads spin. I could feel the pine needles beneath me vibrating subtly, as though the ground itself were alive. Josh grabbed a branch and held it like a weapon, eyes wide with terror. Mia clutched my arm, whispering that we should leave. But every path we tried seemed to loop back to the clearing. The forest had shifted while we weren't looking, turning familiar trails into impossible labyrinths. Then, from the darkness beyond the firelight, one of the shadowy figures stepped forward. It wasn't fully visible, more like a smear of darkness, tall and thin, with elongated limbs. It paused, tilting its head as though observing us. The whispering intensified, now forming words I could almost understand. "You shouldn't be here. Stay with us." Panic gripped me. The forest was no longer just watching. It was speaking, beckoning, and we were trapped. I stood frozen, heart hammering, as the shadow moved closer, silently gliding over the pine needles. The whispers became a chorus, circling us, almost melodic, yet suffocating in intensity. Mia tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat, as if the forest swallowed it before it could escape. Josh swung the branch at the figure, but his arms passed through nothing. The shadow paused, tilting as if amused, and the whispers grew louder, pressing into our minds. Every instinct told me we needed to run, yet the forest refused to yield. The trees seemed to lean inward, forming a wall of trunks and darkness that blocked every exit. I realized then that the forest wasn't natural. It was a predator, patient and ancient, feeding on fear. The whispering pines had claimed anyone foolish enough to wander too deep, and now we were marked. A cold breeze brushed my face, carrying a final chilling message. "You belong to us now." We bolted from the clearing, stumbling over roots and uneven ground, the whispers following us like a suffocating fog. Every step we took, the forest seemed to shift, branches stretching to block our path or scratch at our skin. The shadows moved fluidly between the pines, never fully seen but always present, closing the distance with silent intent. I grabbed Mia's hand, and Josh shouted directions, though none of the trails looked familiar anymore. The pine trees towered above us, forming twisted arches that seemed to trap us in an endless corridor. My flashlight flickered, briefly illuminating the shadowy forms ahead. They were taller than any human, with elongated limbs bending impossibly, sliding between trees with a predatory grace. The whispers became urgent, almost pleading, "Join us. Never leave." I realized we weren't just being hunted. We were being lured, guided by an ancient intelligence that existed in the forest long before humans ever set foot here. We reached a narrow clearing, barely wide enough for us to move freely, and the shadows hesitated. For a brief moment, the whispers stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against our ears and chest. The forest seemed to watch us, every pine needle and branch alive, with unseen intent. I noticed strange markings on the ground, patterns of scratches forming circles, almost ritualistic. My stomach sank. The whispering pines didn't just guide the lost, it trapped them, feeding off fear and possibly using it for some unknown purpose. Suddenly, one of the dark figures emerged fully into the clearing. It was taller than any human, limbs unnaturally bent, face obscured in darkness, but I felt its gaze pierce me. Mia screamed, and the figure tilted its head, almost amused. Then it retreated, melting back into the shadows, leaving us paralyzed with fear. I realized the forest wasn't going to let us leave so easily, and that our survival depended on outsmarting something far older and smarter than us. We moved cautiously, trying to keep our distance from the shadows. But every turn we took felt like a trap. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting paths we thought we knew into unfamiliar corridors of pines. My chest ached from panic, and every breath felt heavy, as if the air itself were trying to hold us down. Then I heard it, louder this time, a whisper directly behind me, forming words that made my blood run cold. "You cannot leave, not without becoming one of us." I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly, but the shadows were gone, leaving only darkness and the oppressive stillness of the pines. Mia clutched my arm, trembling. Josh's face was pale, eyes wide with terror. We knew that staying in one place would mean capture, but moving forward was no safer. The forest had become a living predator, and we were its prey. Every instinct screamed for us to run, but where the trail led was unknown. Suddenly, the whispers converged into a chorus, louder and more urgent, coming from all directions. The forest felt alive around us, trees bending subtly, casting shadows that seemed to reach for us. The figures moved in tandem with the whispers, flickering at the edges of our vision, their forms long, thin, and impossibly distorted. We stumbled upon a small pond, moonlight reflecting off its surface. For a moment, the forest seemed to pause, as if watching us, waiting to see what we would do next. My reflection in the waters shimmered strangely, distorted, like the forest was warping reality itself. The shadow figures circled the pond silently, keeping just out of reach, whispering our names in voices that were not quite human. The realization hit me like ice. The whispering pines weren't just haunting us. They were studying us, learning, deciding whether we would survive the night. We had to find a way out, but every instinct told us the forest had already planned our fate. We ran again, desperate and unthinking, branches tearing at our clothes and roots tripping our feet. The shadows followed silently, gliding through the trees with unnatural grace, never fully revealing themselves, but always present. The whispers were relentless now, circling us like a predator closing in, echoing our names and mocking our fear. I glanced back and saw them. Elongated, distorted forms slipping between the pines, moving faster than any human could. The forest itself seemed to shift with their motion, twisting paths and reshaping the undergrowth. My chest burned, every heartbeat loud in my ears, and I realized the whispering pines weren't just stalking us. They were reshaping reality around us, trapping us in a nightmare that might never end. The pond from earlier glimmered in the distance. We ran toward it, hoping for refuge, but the forest seemed determined to pull us back, stretching and bending as if it had grown eyes and hands. Survival meant more than speed. It meant outsmarting something far older than us. We reached the pond, gasping for breath, hearts hammering, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the shadows paused. The whispers faded slightly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed on our chests. The reflection in the water shimmered unnaturally, showing our faces warped, distorted, as if the forest were trying to claim our very identities. Mia and Josh clung to each other, terrified, while I scanned the tree line for any sign of escape. The shadows did not advance, but I could feel their awareness, watching, judging. I understood then that the whispering pines weren't finished with us. They never truly would be. At dawn, when the first sunlight pierced through the canopy, the forest appeared calm, almost serene. Yet we knew better. The shadows had retreated for now, leaving only the memory of whispers, the fear, and the knowledge that the forest had marked us. We had survived. but the whispering pines would always remember us. My name is Daniel Cruz, and this happened during a solo camping trip in one of the most remote sections of a national park. I had chosen this area because it was far from the main trails, isolated and perfect for escaping the noise of the city. The forest was dense, filled with towering trees and narrow paths barely wide enough for one person. I set up camp near a small creek as the sun began to set. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. As I unpacked my gear, I thought I saw movement across the creek. A flicker, a shadow that vanished the moment I turned to look. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a deer or the play of fading sunlight through the branches. As darkness fell, the forest grew unnervingly silent. No wind, no rustling animals, only the soft sound of water trickling over rocks. That's when I heard it. Footsteps approaching my camp, deliberate, slow, and impossible to ignore. I froze, straining to see through the darkness. The footsteps stopped just beyond the light of my small campfire. My heart raced, and I grabbed a flashlight, sweeping it across the trees and creek. Nothing moved. The forest felt unnaturally still, as if it were holding its breath. Then I noticed something even more unsettling. A figure crouched across the creek, barely visible in the shadows, watching. Its posture was unnatural, hunched, limbs elongated, and its face hidden in darkness. I couldn't tell if it was human, animal, or something else entirely. I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize it, but a chill ran down my spine. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my gear and the darkness made retreat difficult. The figure didn't move, yet I could feel its gaze, heavy and intent, pressing against my mind. I realized then that I was not alone, and whatever was out there, it wasn't here by accident. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably just another camper or a deer. But the figure didn't move, didn't shift its gaze. It simply watched, crouched low near the creek. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure it could hear it. I grabbed my tent poles, holding them like a weapon, and whispered to myself that I had to stay alert. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the forest floor. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I considered leaving, but the darkness beyond the creek seemed even more threatening than the figure itself. Then it moved, smoothly, almost gliding, without a sound. It didn't step, it just shifted, sliding behind a tree, then reappearing in another spot, closer this time. The realization hit me. It wasn't bound by normal human limitations. My blood ran cold as the forest seemed to close in, the trees leaning subtly toward the creek, as if complicit in whatever was hunting me. I decided I had to confront it. Slowly, I inched toward the creek, keeping the fire between us, trying to make myself look larger. The figure didn't react, but the air around it seemed to pulse with intent, as if it were aware of my every thought. The closer I got, the more I noticed the unnatural details. Its limbs were too long, bent at impossible angles. Its head tilted unnaturally, almost like it was observing me with a sinister intelligence. I tried to call out, but my voice came out as a hoarse whisper, swallowed immediately by the night. Suddenly, it darted forward, disappearing behind the trees on the opposite bank. I swung the flashlight in its direction, but it was gone. The forest was silent again, but I knew better. It hadn't left. It was waiting, studying, planning its next move. Every instinct screamed to leave, but leaving meant crossing the creek and venturing into the figure's territory. I retreated to my tent, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me jump. My flashlight shook in my hand as I scanned the trees, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. Until I caught a glimpse of it in the reflection of the creek, crouched and observing, its head tilting in that same unnatural way. I debated leaving immediately, but the path back to the main trail was unclear, and I knew stepping into the darkness could be worse. I stayed near the fire, hoping it would provide some barrier, some protection. But the shadows around the edges of the clearing seemed to pulse, moving subtly, almost breathing. Then I heard the whisper, a soft, sibilant voice carried on the wind. "You shouldn't be here." My blood ran cold. The forest wasn't just alive. It was aware, and the figure wasn't alone. It had company, and they were waiting. I knew I had to act. Staying put meant certain doom. I grabbed my gear and slowly moved toward the path I had come from, keeping the fire between me and the shadows. The forest seemed to react, branches bending slightly as if trying to block my escape, shadows moving just at the edge of my vision. The figure reappeared suddenly, sliding across the path ahead, completely silent. My heart pounded, and I nearly tripped over roots in my panic. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, murmuring my name, guiding me or taunting me. I couldn't tell which. I forced myself to keep moving, my senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a branch made me flinch. I realized that the phantom camper wasn't just a single entity. It was part of the forest, an extension of its will. My survival depended on reaching the main trail before it fully decided I had no right to leave. The main trail finally came into view, but it felt different. Narrower, twisted, and overgrown, like the forest had reshaped it while I wasn't looking. The shadows stayed at the edges, moving in perfect synchronization, keeping pace with me, always just out of reach. The whispers grew frantic, circling my mind, murmuring threats and warnings I couldn't fully understand. I stumbled over a root and fell hard, scraping my hands and knees. When I looked up, the figure was closer than ever, crouched behind a tree, watching. Its head tilted unnaturally, and the air around it pulsed with menace. My flashlight flickered, briefly illuminating multiple shadowy shapes among the trees. They weren't alone. Panic surged through me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my mind raced with the realization that running might not save me. The forest had become a predator, and I was its prey. I had to move carefully, strategically, or the phantom camper would claim me before dawn. I forced myself to keep moving, staying low and quiet. The whispers shifted, almost urgent now, echoing from every direction. I could feel the figures studying me, gauging my fear. Each step I took was measured, careful, trying not to draw attention. But the forest seemed to anticipate my every move. A faint light appeared in the distance, the parking area where my car was parked. My hope surged, but so did terror. I knew the shadows would try to stop me before I reached safety. I glanced back and caught a glimpse of one of the figures standing fully upright, impossibly tall, limbs bent in unnatural angles, watching me with what I can only describe as curiosity. I realized then that these weren't just random apparitions. The phantom camper and its companions were intelligent, ancient, and patient. They didn't need to attack outright. They could wait, observe, and let fear do the work for them. I ran faster, the distant glow of the parking area growing slightly brighter with each step. The shadows moved at the edges of my vision, silent, fluid, and impossible to catch. The whispers became a chorus, echoing my name, twisting my thoughts, making every footstep feel heavier. Branches snagged my clothes and roots tripped me, but I pushed forward, driven by the desperate need to escape. I caught glimpses of the figures between the trees, elongated limbs, distorted forms, always just beyond the firelight of my flashlight. The forest seemed alive, shaping itself to keep me trapped, its breath cold against my neck, its presence everywhere. I realized the phantom camper didn't need to touch me. The fear alone was enough. It had been toying with me, testing my limits, and the forest had been complicit, bending and twisting reality to keep me within its grasp. My survival depended on reaching that light and leaving the forest behind completely. I burst into the clearing where my car was parked, panting, bruised, and trembling. The shadows didn't follow me into the open, but I could still feel their gaze lingering at the forest's edge. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed in, reminding me that the phantom camper was patient. It would always be there, waiting for the next victim. I didn't wait to calm down. I jumped into my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The forest receded behind me, still silent, still watching. Even now, when I think about that night, I can feel the weight of those eyes, the cold intelligence behind the whispers. I know I survived. But I also know the phantom camper and its companions never truly release their prey. The forest claimed part of me that night, a fear that follows me in every shadow, every rustle of leaves, every whisper carried on the wind.